Welcome to ECPG Live on Gaming Culture. I am Tana Russell, Assistant Director with the Evergreen Council on Problem Gambling here in Washington State. Our guests today are joining us from Washington, D.C., Doctors Ed Spector and Cliff Sussman. They are both pioneers in their field of treating gaming addiction, internet addiction, compulsive tech use and screen use, etc., all things. They've both been featured in a number of publications and articles and media appearances, and we are honored to have them as presenters in our Foundations in Gaming Disorder core training. It is 15 plus CE hours of credit, all about treating gaming disorder. And so we're honored to have them with us for that. And they're sharing a bit with you today about gaming as well. So thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us. Yes.
Excellent. Is there anything else you'd like to the viewers to know? This is kind of a unique field that you're in, and it's constantly changing and developing. Can you tell us a little bit maybe about how you got into this field or why you're passionate about it?
Do you want to start, Ed, with that one?
All right. I think I may have started like 2 weeks before you did, so that makes sense. So I was in a private practice. That was sort of general, just sort of like teenagers. I am a gamer and have always been really interested in technology and connected to this world, and just had a couple clients come down the pike where it ended up that they were really compulsively gaming to the point where it was really ruining their lives. And then just sort of looked around to see if anyone was doing anything about this problem. Were they encountering it? What were the kind of treatment modalities? And found very little. It was, we're talking in the early 2000s and mid 2000s. And then, really just sort of made some stuff up. It was kind of like the Wild West of psychotherapy, based on cognitive behavioral therapy and the addictions models and what was done with obsessive sort of like eating, compulsive eating, and just sort of like helped a couple of people. And then it sort of got out there that there was a guy who cured people of World of Warcraft. And then I couldn't stop it. Once that got out there, every referral was like, oh, you're the guy who does this. And very quickly went out on my own and just sort of did some talks. And then I met Cliff, actually, who I encountered. What happened was I learned that there was a psychiatrist out there who knew a lot about coding and had made a game. And then I was like, all right, we're going to convert this guy to our cause. And so Cliff, I think I reached out to you, if I remember correctly, and was like, all right, we got to meet.
So I remember contacting you. I think it was Carrie Heller. Dr. Carrie Heller had put us in touch, a psychologist who knows both of us. And I had told him about my interest in wanting to, deal with this problem. And he told me about you and said, I have to call you. And you were a mentor. You were someone who really encouraged me. And and really gave me even extra convincing than I already had that this was a problem of great demand and very little supply.
Right.
So
I think there may be even now, there may be only 10 or 15 of us in the country who really specialize to this level. And so to have two within walking distance of each other,
it's pretty cool.
Extraordinary. And I was really psyched. And so, that's how we sort of, that's the beginning of our bromance.
Yeah. And then you got Dr. Adam Pletter in our area too.
Right. And then we got a trio, man.
Right.
We're doing well here.
So yeah, it's and it's a lot of fun having other colleagues close by and around the country as well who also have an interest in this. I got into it a very similar way to you. I was a gamer, pretty hardcore gamer growing up in the days of like early gaming when people were playing on Macs and PCs and playing all these like long single player adventure games with lots of puzzles, because I was always into puzzles and I was into coding and I was into programming and designing and developing games. And before I went to medical school, I developed some educational software. So I was all into that stuff. I was into designing stuff for the internet. And but then when I went into practice, when I went to fellowship, there was no training in it. And when I went into practice, there were parents coming in, just like with you, telling me that their kids are addicted to video games. And they didn't really feel very validated by a lot of other people they'd seen, because they'd sort of dismissed it and said, oh, your kid's got depression, they've got anxiety, they have ADHD, just give them some medication. They weren't really taking it like a serious problem in and of itself. And I don't know how much these other providers even knew about gaming. But when I actually would assess them, I would see that they were showing the same types of behaviors and problems that you would see on your addiction rotations. You'd see the same types of issues, the same types of problems functioning. And, so that's when I started to really get into studying the effect of excessive gaming on the brain. And I would read a lot of fMRI studies and found that there's really a lot of overlap between how the brain is affected by substances and by games.
That's fantastic. And I don't know if I told you guys this, but you both were the inspiration for having this episode from our last Foundations in Gaming Disorder training.
That's pretty cool.
That's
scary.
I didn't know that.
I'm scared. I don't know.
So you talked about how, if you're going to see people to address gaming, you really need to know something about gaming. And some of the feedback that we got from the last cohort of training attendees from that session was, great, where can I learn more about gaming specifically, right? And so and not just from that cohort of trainees, but I hear a lot from people that say, I recognize this is important. I'm on board with that. Yeah. Where can I get information for this? All I know is what I see in my own home or my friends, etc. And I know there's more out there. So kind of by popular demand was the inspiration behind having this. So I appreciate that. And on that, so we have a lot of viewers from all over, not just in Washington State, also some out of the country and in other parts of the nation. Some are behavioral health treatment providers, be it in mental health or substance use, some medical, parents, people with lived experience in recovery and their loved ones, advocates, people in the recovery services industry, etc. And the common denominator is many are seeing what you were just describing, these ties with these other issues. It looks a lot, it behaves a lot like these other addictions. And so there's a lot of interest to learn more on this. So to get us started with the basic 101, for someone that's knowledge of gaming is maybe limited or is looking to learn more, what are some of the popular genres that are out there right now?
Cliff, why don't you start us off and then I'll go into the weeds.
Well, okay. So I'll give you some general genres. That's a good idea. So there's the biggest, I would say, selling type of game now, the most popular, and the pandemic didn't slow it down at all, is massive multiplayer online games. That they're so you basically have people from all over the world as well as local people who know each other going online and playing each other. But there's many different genres within that, subgenres within that genre. So you have your first person shooter games, like Fortnite, and you have your, and some of them are like King of the Hill style games. You have your sports games like, or like Madden. You have your hybrid weird sports games like what's the one with this Rocket League? Yeah, the one where you kick soccer balls with a car. So you have so there's that. That's really the big thing. There's Minecraft, where it's like it sort of combines a sandbox / building game, like where you're building a world out of these like virtual Legos, kind like 3-dimensional pixels, and with the multiplayer atmosphere where everyone can play in each other's worlds, and you can even sort of do your own coding, and it's very customizable. You can make your own game out of it. So So there's games like that allow for a lot of creativity. The term sandbox game, I think, generally just refers to this big world where you can explore and kind of do lots of different things. But there's also many subgenres of sandbox games. Then there are games that are more meant for like single player, where you're going, through a world and maybe interacting mostly with NPCs, which are non-player characters, and maybe solving some puzzles along the way and going on adventures, games like Skyrim or Grand Theft Auto, or there's a lot of different really popular genres, and I'm just trying to hit on some of the most popular.
I would jump in and grab one other category, which I saw a real blossoming of in the last really since Fortnite, which is we have this games where you can play with your friends online, which of course during COVID became like almost a necessity. Like, I want to hang with my friends, I can't see them in person. So any game that allowed you to do that sort of got really catalyzed in terms of that community, became a lot more important. And there's a sort of a team shooter game, which is where you have a number of people, you and 2, 3, 4, or 5 or 6 of your friends are all on a team going against another team against them. And it might be shooting, it might be like wizardry, but like there's a contest.
Like Team Fortress 2 or something like that.
TF2 was probably the first. That's a very old one, but we have Overwatch and Valorant.
Oh, Overwatch, right.
And then League of Legends. And they could be first person, where you really only see your perspective, or they could be third person. I think Fortnite is third person.
And Fortnite also has an element of building stuff thrown in, taken kind of from Minecraft, which makes it a real weird hybrid of things.
Right. You're building up a fort that someone else is, to block people while trying to stay alive while the storm is moving. Right. It's like this crazy dynamic. So these are all like different genres, and then there are sort of more puzzle-like games as well, and then there are mobile games, which are
tablet games,
right? Which are one of the things that I saw during COVID and during when school went online. I had not heard about Roblox in maybe 5 years. No one had talked about Roblox, and all of a sudden, every new referral. And I think part of it is Roblox was a game you could play with your friends, and really, it's not a game; it's like a million different games.
It's a world.
Right. And you could play with all your friends. And it was low enough powered that you could play it on a really crappy laptop while you were multitasking and pretending to be in school. And so Roblox, I think, and it was younger kids. So I don't know if this happened to you, Cliff, but in my practice, I saw a lot more younger people who never would have come to me without the pandemic, who were all of a sudden just getting caught up in it. And then
that happened a lot. And people were switching to games like that from mobile games like, Clash of Clans, because they wanted to be, they were forced to be at home on a PC. So, they might as well do their multiplayer stuff there. So I saw that too. And also I saw like random games get really big. Like, there was this game where you're designing levels that's kind of like Mario Maker called Geometry Dash, which like people just play really compulsively, and it's got a multiplayer aspect to it. It's like all these old, even old genres of games have like evolved into multiplayer games. So, these old school platform games like Mario that we used to play in the arcade when I was a kid, they've become, or then later on Nintendo, like they've become games where you make your own levels, and then you have to beat them yourself. And once you can beat them yourself, you can post them for your friends to try and beat. So it gets to be a very competitive thing.
I have a funny story with that, which is my son made his first Mario level on that and had me play it. And he made it so that you just die immediately. Like he destroyed he found every way of destroying a person. And so you just walk into a room and like there's no way you could possibly survive. And I looked at him like, I think
except
right. But so I like looked at him and I said, I think we need to like reassess your
priorities
toward your player. I don't think we're gonna have this game. I don't think they're gonna like this game.
Yeah. We should send our kids to each other for therapy.
Seriously. That's a serious play date right there.
We have a question we'll take in just a minute, but while we're on this, I wanted to ask, and it's just your own experience really, but have you noticed any trends with certain types of games or genres of games you feel are maybe more addicting than others, that maybe have a tendency to suck people in stronger than maybe some other types of games?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the MMOs have always been
Yeah.
Where the most just sort of you get lost and never return.
Yeah.
So that's a massive multiplayer online game. The actual abbreviation is MMORPG, which is massive multiplayer online role player game.
Yeah.
And of course, if you have to abbreviate your abbreviation, you've really made a bad abbreviation. So now they just call them MMOs.
Right.
And those games, people will, when they're having psychological problems in their life, they'll find a world where they can go and create a whole second self, a second version of themselves, and they'll just get lost and become really like high powered and just amazing in that world, and then never want to leave it. And the game never ends. And it's you and like 14 million people or whatever, just kind of playing. And it's just real easy to get lost into that. And you sort of lose track of time and, really just sort of dive in. So the MMOs are the first part. But, I mean, we saw Fortnite. I mean, everyone was playing that just intensely. And I don't know that I would have predicted that.
But there's another one that's really hot right now, or at least was for a little while. There's always a new trend, but it was this cartoony one where you sort of go around the spaceship and do you know the one I'm talking? Among Us, that's it.
What is it?
Yeah.
Among Us? Yeah.
See, I'm not as big a multiplayer gamer,
right.
So I just know most of these from my patients. I was a big single player gamer for years.
Right. I mean, Among Us was like a game night kind of thing to do during pandemic, because anyone could play it. It was sort of chill,
right?
It was very multiplayer. Right. It was fun to do if you were a bunch of teenagers or like middle schoolers. So that was just like a nice social thing. In the same way that like that Jack in the Box game or Jetpack or whatever that was, where it was like a bunch of other party games and you'd sort of connect with people.
Oh, right. Yeah, you don't know Jack or something, or something like that.
Yeah,
it's Jack something. You're right. Yeah. I forget what it was, but I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
And in any case, like the way I try to figure out which games are the most addictive or explain it to people is I try to categorize what are the addictive qualities, what are the addictive characteristics of games. So one of the ones that Ed and I have sort of already really touched on is the social aspect, and especially during a time when you're socially isolated and need to connect to your friends, and that adds a bit of social pressure and fear of missing out to why you need to stay on your game. It's like, come on, Mom, I don't want to abandon all my friends here by stopping in the middle. So there's games that like really make you crave to get on it all the time, and then there's other games which once you get on it, it's really hard to stop, and there's a lot that are both. And so some of the characteristics are things like that, just it's very social, and other characteristics are it's really an escape from life. It's really, it takes you to another place. It's immersive, right? Exactly. And then there's games that have a lot of things that are variable and random and left to chance, that sort of gambler aspect to gaming, right. That you get when you pull the slots in Vegas, that a lot of games are designed to, have a lot of like random outcomes so that there's always that sort of gambler's high you get from playing it.
So they're called like random drops is what the kids will describe. So you go against a big creature, like a boss, an enemy, and then there's a 22% chance or whatever chance that some really good item is going to, be the result of having the reward for having beaten that creature. And so people will grind on that. They will keep playing the game over and over until they get
and
the
there's
item.
Loot boxes too, right. Which they're, it's like, it's all based on sort of basic gambling concepts of variable ratio reinforcement and basic behavioral studies we've done even on rats. So, they are designed to be addictive and to get you to keep playing. I think actually the most important characteristic of this, of all games, and the one that they all have to have to be addictive, in fact, anything has to have it to be addictive, that I always point out, is immediate gratification, right? You have to have the ability to get stimulated right away and continuously. And so one of the reasons games are more addictive now is because their computers are faster, they boot up faster, and they're available in more forms, tablets, different devices. Plus if you're at home already, you don't have to go home to get on a screen. So it's like easier access. You get your hit of dopamine faster. And that is an incredibly good predictor of what makes things addictive in general.
But not just because you have access to the game, but actually within the game, there's a reinforcement schedule, which I think what you're talking about, where
both,
is there gratification that you can get in any given moment, but also you're still hungering for more gratification in that moment as well. So there's
they have to keep you anticipating.
Right. So every time you get something, there's yet another thing they immediately give you. And they also the way they make it sort of they create a sense of urgency in the game to be addictive, and where if you leave, you're going to miss out on something. And there isn't they don't give you clear ending points where it's like the end of a chapter of a book with a cliffhang isn't really the end of a chapter.
Yeah.
These games are really good at doing that, where I'm just going to get to here. And then when you get to there, they give you a little twist that makes you want to continue. And then you tell your mom, no, I'm not ready yet. Because I don't care if dinner was an hour ago, I'm staying.
One more thing.
Right. One more thing. And that it's what's important to remember is that it's designed to be that way. Like the developers have made it that way so that you will stay there.
Sure.
It's all of this is by design. It's not by accident.
Yeah. And of course, they'll also throw in gratuitous sex and violence to keep you on as well, or to keep you interested and to keep you playing. So,
yeah. And on kind of in theme with the content and telling mom you need just one more round, we've had a couple questions about ages, right? One of our staff members pointed out that gaming disorder can often be seen as a youth issue, but we know it's bigger than that. And D. Carlene, hi, thank you for tuning in, D.
Yeah.
Wanted to know, are there certain age groups that are seeking help and treatment more than others? So what are some of those differences? Is gaming disorder primarily a youth afflicting disorder, or is it more across the board? And are young people more likely to seek treatment than adults, or vice versa?
Well, certainly kids don't seek treatment at all. It's the parents who bring them in, and often unwillingly. But I mean, clearly
there's a few exceptions, but that's true.
Right. Yeah. And then so we have lots of school age kids, and then college age. So in the 20s is what I'm primarily working with. I don't have anyone, I think, right now over 30. And that's been the case for a very long time. I mean, in terms of who needs help, what COVID has done, so I think it made learning really difficult for certain sets of populations. And then those populations coped by diving into technology, which was available. And then those people started seeking treatment. People who I think wouldn't have come into us before because they would have been in school in person, and they would have had soccer after school. So I'm seeing people who I don't think I would have seen, I've seen more of them, and more kids who were maybe, before I think I was seeing kids who were more off the beaten path, like they weren't really into mainstream interests. And now I'm seeing kids who really would have been doing mainstream interests, but now aren't. So I don't know if you're seeing something different.
That's exactly what I'm seeing. And I'm seeing a lot of, there's a surge in all ages, particularly, 12 through 16. Because these were the kids who, had to switch to school online and really were very good at multitasking and getting away with gaming all day. And, and whose parents couldn't just be watching them all the time. And, I'm also working
in the basement.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, there's also a lot of, parents of much younger kids who are getting my help than before. Because let's face it, online schooling was a disaster for them as well. And, and plus it's actually good to start at an earlier age, to get some prevention in place. And they're making apps for babies now, as a side note. So it is a problem afflicting younger kids.
I'm waiting for the prenatal apps.
Yeah, right. You have to have it on the ultrasound or something.
Right, just sitting there on the belly.
Yeah. But it's really that and the unfortunate thing about the pandemic, among other things, is that I'm not able to see people in person. So I was seeing a lot more kids actually before the pandemic in my office one-on-one, And good luck trying to do on-screen psychotherapy with an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old. Their eyes are going to be all over the place, and you're not going to have activities you can do with them. So I've had to shift a lot of the work with that population to the parents, which is, unfortunate, but I can get quite a bit done anyway that way. But I'm seeing a lot of as I always have, I'm working with failure to launch cases, like young adults who dropped out of school or, don't. And I mean, the pandemic made it even harder to get jobs. So, so I work with a lot of adults, some of whom actually really want the help. They're not just being pushed by their parents as an intervention.
The older folks are much more likely to have had real failure experiences and be like, all right, we need to deal with this.
Yeah, that's true.
They're sort of, especially if they've been bolstered up by parents who are not letting them fail entirely. They're like, what's the problem? Mm-hmm. There's a local park that I go to. And I'm there. The people must think I have 12 children. But I show up there with a different kid and we do a walk and talk. Just because there's no way this screen works. And in fact, doing this, Cliff, maybe we should talk a little. Doing this work during a pandemic with telehealth, it's like treating an alcoholic in a bar. That's true. I've seen a lot of eyes going back and forth with kids of all ages. You hear you hear the keyboard clicking, and
right. And you hear the mouse clicking.
My particular video app, it lets us share screens, so I make them share their screen. So they can't do that, and
that's smart.
You can tell with their glasses that something's changed. All of a sudden, there's bright colors coming.
Right, you look at the reflection.
And it's just really hard though, because they really can't. They want to be there, they want to talk with you, but they can't. They're really struggling.
Oh yeah. And that's the whole idea, is that they're out of control. There were kids who had, before the pandemic, who would come into my office, and until I had them put down their cell phone, leave it in one room, and we'd go into another room, there was no hope of connecting with them.
Right.
But then as soon as they're in a different setting, away from their devices, they can sometimes become a totally different kid.
Yeah.
Speaking of kind of some of your treatment approaches, Stacy on Facebook had a question for you. How would you approach a gamer who's concerned about losing that social aspect when they're trying to stop their gaming?
Yeah, that's a huge question. They're really concerned.
May not have time to fully unpack.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Well, it's not just them who are concerned, it's the parents who are concerned, because the parents are like, I don't want to cut my kid off from the only socializing he has. Mm-hmm. I actually work with a lot of high functioning autistic kids. I bet you do too, Ed. Yeah, me too. And and for them, it may literally be their only social life, because it levels the social playing field for them. Yeah. And it's like you don't want to cut off someone's life supply. It's just that you also have to look at how valuable or how well-rounded and how generalizable is the social experience they're having to the real world. Is it, yes, there could be a lot of value in and of itself, and it can be a very good thing, the social interactions you can have online, but they're not exactly the same as the social interactions you have in the real world. And there are skills that you don't develop. There are skills you're avoiding developing by doing it online, and you're just not getting as rich a social experience. You're not getting as many aspects of socializing online, and you're getting a lot of them very redundantly, and giving kids sort of a false view of how socializing works. So I know I'm speaking very general, but I would say that kids do need some variation in how they socialize in it, and it is important to be able to set those limits. And as far as how you approach a gamer, I think you have to really validate their ambivalence about it, and validate that they feel like it's really cutting them off from something and they really need it. And you have to help them explore what they like about it, not just what they need to change. And when you really, it's better if you can have them tell you why they need to have a limit than if you tell them.
We also focus on it's the quality of the time versus the quantity. And so there are plenty of things that they're doing that are sort of redundant, that don't really add value to their lives socially. And so, you know, it's like if you're doing 6 hours of that, like you switch to 3, you don't really lose much.
That's right.
And then if you add with those 3 hours something really that is sort of new and different and more offers more diversity in terms of your social interactions or your life in general, you're generally going to be better off. And so it's really this balancing act. And it's usually not a hard sell to be like, well, why don't we just take 1 hour and do something different with it? Right. So you can go more gradual potentially. And especially if they have a positive experience, you get them to join something else like a yoga class, or I don't know, and it ends up being positive, then you can kind of get some momentum there and shift. But
people like Ed are really good at meeting kids where they are. Like, and one of the brilliant things that you did, Ed, was you had this group for kids where they were like doing things like D&D together or board games and things like that, as I understand it. So you were getting these kids who usually only socialize on Discord or whatever, like you were getting them at a table, like socializing in real life together, and they could still geek out on stuff and do the stuff they're into and maybe get a little too fixated on things. But you know, they were definitely like having to read nonverbal cues and having to bond and getting to bond with each other in a different way than they're used to, and sort of deal with some of the things that make them uncomfortable. So it was a great sort of way to meet them halfway, I think, Ed. And we should have more things like that.
I have an addendum to that, which is interesting. So that group, I have a game night that I used to run before COVID, where a bunch of my clients would come, be 20 guys, and have like board games and card games and D&D. And then we seeded the D&D game so that it was weekly at someone's house. And so the D&D game happened for like 2 years. And I sort of lost track of it because those guys were, you know, in their 20s and they were just having a good time. I went rock climbing last week. I'm not joking. Literally last week, I'm at the rock climbing gym and I see the D&D group rock climbing together at Earth Treks. It's like,
that's so cool.
Awesome, right? I mean, totally
like you made friendships,
right?
You know, real
like
friendships.
They're totally dorking out in a new way. And one of them had lost like 45 pounds. It's awesome. So, I mean, once you give them alternatives, it really makes a difference. So it's finding those other ways that they can be social and they can sort of experience the opportunity cost of what they already know, you know, versus what's really great.
That's excellent. You can play D&D online, by the way. Like I did that during COVID. I played D&D with some friends, but without using any digital stuff. It was all like us rolling real dice. It was awesome. Like, and I hadn't done that since I was like 10. So
I mean, I ran a 2-year.
Sorry for interrupting you, Tom.
No, I ran a 2-year campaign with my son and my nephew and 2 of their friends. We just finished it, so I'll go away to summer camp. It was awesome, and we did it on Zoom or we did it out on the front porch, you know, socially.
You feel a lot more connected that way than you do when you're just like, you know, playing a game online with someone. Like when I'm playing online chess or something, it's like, you know, I don't even know who I'm playing, and I can't see their face, and you know, so.
I like the idea that it should be replaced with something that's still equally fun. And I'm thinking parents should probably resist the urge to say, stop gaming and go do chores. Right? Like,
well, that's true. Yeah.
Replace it
You're
with
more likely
more
to get a power struggle.
Beginning. Yeah.
Right.
Chores still have to get done though, too. They do.
I think you had a question up there about lingo that we didn't get to. You had a question pop up.
Well, you guys have already you've already taught us some lingo. We know what RPG is, role player games, MMO, massively multiplayer something other.
Yeah.
Online gaming.
Don't forget noob. That's somebody who like.
Oh, noob is a good one.
Yeah. You're a noob.
That's someone who's new to a game.
That sounds what it is. Right
all
now.
Parents are noobs, basically.
Yeah.
And
Although if a parent were to play their child in a game to get a feel for the game and get utterly destroyed, that might make it more enjoyable.
Yeah, and I don't think parents should try that hard to learn kids' gaming jargon. I think what they should learn is there is like sort of like a language that kids speak to their parents about games that parents should be able to translate. I call it screenish. It's like, so if a kid says, you know, I talk to my friend. What it actually means is that they use some form of text to communicate with their friend, be it Instagram or Discord or Snapchat. Like kids don't, like we meant, we talked on the phone or something in our generation, but that's not what kids mean. And those are the things parents have to pick up on. If a kid says, I need to relax for a while, it doesn't mean they're going to like lie on a bed and close their eyes and like, do some meditation. Yeah, right. Or crochet. It means they're going to relax gaming with their friends in a very exciting manner. And if they say they're not gaming, it usually means they're going to watch other people play games, like watch Twitch for 2 hours, and then they can tell you they weren't gaming. So, with parents, you got to sort of read between the lines. I've lit many other examples, but
Thank you.
Those are the biggest ones that come to mind.
Very, very good. Very good.
The other thing is like when parents try to use these words and they don't know them, they're not like a consumer, it's just not going to go well. I remember a parent saying, like, I just can't stand that he uses that Xbox, that Matchbox 360. It's just like, you're like, oh, wait, and it's like, so we end up butchering it and then sounding like idiots anyways.
Right.
So I mean, it's more that you're reading them right and that you're interested in what they're saying and trying to understand it.
That's true.
Getting frustrated because they're talking up sort of in a language that's harder to understand.
Yeah.
I was thinking about lingo and trying to think of like what was the strangest thing someone's ever said to me, and I remember in like, I don't know, this was like 2009. Someone, and I wrote it down in their progress notes because I was like I had to like translate it later. And the sentence they said to me was, they were playing PvP and it was 3v3 and they blew all their crits doing CC, so it didn't go well. That's what they said to me. And I was like, oh, that sounds really difficult. Yes.
Right.
Sounds like that was really bad for you. I bet you it didn't go well. And I'm writing it down and then I'm like, I'm going to look that up later. Like, what is that? And I can now proudly say what that is. So PvP is player versus player, which is in contrast with player versus environment, right? So he was doing player versus player, but it was 3v3. So it was a team of 3 people against a team of 3 people. And he blew all his crits, all his criticals. So he has these critical moves that he can do, but you can only do a few of them during the match.
Yeah. I didn't pick up on that
early on in the match. So you can do these special moves that are very, very powerful. Kids will say OP, overpowered. And so he blew them all in the beginning of the match, and then he was like kind of powerless and he got sort of destroyed doing CC, which was crowd control, which is moves that make it so other people can't like do the thing that they want to do. And so you will find yourself as a therapist in these situations where they are talking in code. Now, before we get too judgy about that, if I said to the adults in this room, I was having a BLT at Mickey D's near the CIA, and it was A-OK, you would understand what I said. And so that is what they're doing. They're just doing that in their own way, and we're not in those environments, so we don't get the letters yet. But yeah.
Well, I think it's probably more important for parents to like understand their kids' emotions than their language, and to really learn when they need validation instead of a power struggle, and maybe learn when you need to back off for a little while and then come back and try again. Because sometimes it just doesn't go anywhere when you try a power struggle.
And I think you hit on a good point there. I think part of that ties back to the gaming culture, which is when something bad happens in my game, there is an emotional response to that. And that emotional response is just as real as your thing that happened bad to you at work today.
Might even be more intense. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a disconnect between the adults thinking, but it's just a game. Right. But to the kid, it's like, but it's devastating, right? There's something that happened and it's very real.
But also, it's not just that something happened in the game. It's that a person did something to you, often said something to you, or was really rude to you, or trolled you, or did something that was really like not good etiquette for the game. So there's like poor sportsmanship that happens in the games as well. And you have these really toxic environments. The kids will call it cancerous. And they'll actually say like, oh, I got tilted, playing League of Legends. And that's what they mean. Like someone did something that was like deliberately annoying in the game just to piss them off and to ruin the game for lots of people. And so people are doing that. It's like a really vicious playground.
Yeah.
a rough playground. And so kids are dealing with that. And since we didn't grow up with that playground as parents,
Yeah.
we're not useful resources, where I think in previous generations, parents were like, well, I know what I did when, I was bullied or treated poorly in the playground. For us, we're like, haven't ever been in a League of Legends chat room. Not really informed on that. I don't know how I can help you with that. Like it's a very different parenting position to be in.
Yeah. I think Maureen might have posted this question. The World Health Organization recognizes gaming disorder as a mental health issue. Do you think the APA will follow in the next DSM? So the American Psychological, look, I get to translate some language. American Psychological Association.
It's actually It's actually American Psychiatric Association. No offense said.
No, it's more important APA.
Yeah, the DSM is American Psychiatric, but psychologists will use it too. Although actually, one of the things that's changed in recent years is that insurance companies will really want the World Health Code, the ICD code. They don't really care about. Yeah, they don't care as much about the DSM code anymore. So, but yes, the answer to your question is yes. I definitely think it'll be in the next DSM, and it's going to be called internet gaming disorder, because that's what's in the current DSM as a provisional diagnosis, and there's section 3, which are conditions requiring further research. But
the World Health Organization sort of presented it as not as something for research. It said it's a thing disorder, and here it is. And then lots of countries and their organizations have sort of weighed in, either by rejecting it and saying, well, but we're not going to really, like Canada was like, but no,
we won't pay for it.
We're not going to really, we don't think that's a thing. And like, at least that was an early on, maybe they've changed. So I think there's like a real wait and see as to what various countries are going to do and various organizations are going to do that sort of matter. And then that'll change everything in terms of like what we as professionals on the ground are doing.
Yeah, and there's a couple side notes on this. One is that the ICD-10 is being used now, and gaming disorder will be in the ICD-11. I'm not sure when they make the switch over. And then another side note is that gaming disorder and internet gaming disorder are leaving out all sorts of other addictions to screen activities. And I don't think I really hope people don't misinterpret that as, social media addiction, for example, doesn't exist. I hope they realize that the reasons they're labeling these disorders and not those is because there's just more research out on it now. And maybe those will follow behind someday. I personally would prefer a more general term.
Right. I hope they do. Just compulsive tech use.
Exactly.
They've made it so specific it's less useful.
I mean, that was a problem with drugs too, that they'd have all these like very specific, cocaine use disorder, heroin use disorder, and then you had to have like a certain amount to make it polysubstance. But that's not really understanding addiction. Addiction is about a final common pathway in all these things. Yes, they have different ways of getting into us, but the final effect on our brain, on the reward system in our brain, the dopamine pathways, it's all the same. There's a reason why all of these things are hard to stop doing. A common reason.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Addiction can be have different expressions, but every addiction has some things in common. It can destroy a life one way or another. And take over.
The symptoms described are the same for all of them, really. If you look at the types of functional limitations we're looking for to say someone has an addiction, they're really very similar for just about everything that's been called an addiction.
Cliff, I don't know if this has happened with your clientele, but I have a unusually high number of kids of alcoholics. And so they dive into technology and they don't drink at all. They don't do any drugs. My population as a whole are teetotalers. They really don't do a lot of any of that, and they feel like they've been sort of pious. Like, all right, well, I would never do anything like that, and then they do 12 hours of gaming a day, and and ruin their lives, and have the same brain shift that we talked about. The sort of the brain scans would show that they followed a different path to the same biological problem. And so I feel like
But
they're
we
like
know there's
thinking-
genetic overlap.
right, definitely.
And I have seen some of that. And yeah, I mean, I definitely see a lot of kids. I am surprised by how few of the kids who are really super hardcore gamers don't also smoke weed, because because I was treating so many other teenagers for marijuana problems before I got into this exclusively. And you think that a lot of kids would want to get high and game, and I know a lot do. But you'd be surprised how many are, as you say, teetotalers. That's like their only drug is game. Yeah, they're purists. And you know, so but I mean, it's I think it even just supports my theory that you can sort of switch one addiction for another. You know, it's like the way you see people who quit alcohol, you know, in AA, and they're outside the meeting smoking cigarettes and looking at their cell phone,
or compulsively exercising to the point where they
absolutely. Oh,
right?
yeah.
So you can try
definitely.
to do it in a healthy way too, right? It's a compulsive tendency to have one solution to all problems.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. We had another question here. Is there something similar to a dry drunk phenomenon kind of thing in gaming, an inactive, inaction player? And I think this might have been in reference to someone saying, look, I'm not gaming, but they're streaming, watching someone else gaming for, you know, several hours. Is there a similar kind of effect they're getting out of that, where it is kind of just switching from playing a game to involved in a game in just a different way?
We usually have to address that pretty early on in the treatment, that like if you switch from gaming to watching YouTubers also game instead, you've just switched your gin to vodka. Like you haven't
exactly.
You haven't actually changed anything.
You're not a dry drunk. You're a drunk. Like you're still a drunk. You know, using that, you know, expression,
that metaphor. So
that
I think it's tempting, and it's totally understandable that someone be like, all right, I'm not going to play the game, and instead I'm going to watch all these people, and I'm going to go on the website and, you know, read about the lore of the game. They're still sort of in it. And it's just they've shifted it a little bit, and you can applaud them for like problem solving and just be like, all right, what's the next step in your development? Because this isn't enough. It's still you compulsing about this game. And the time and the same side effects are still happening to you, the, you know, the lower functioning and not being able to do schoolwork and whatever, or your work. So it's the same consequences. And then you just keep moving on. You're like, all right, this was a good first step. Let's keep going.
They often do both, and they might even just switch to like streaming episodes on Netflix, or, you know, while binge watching series, which is actually something I've seen a lot and my practice. And you know, so it's not, it really is just switching one source of dopamine with another. But when I think you ask about the dry drunk, I think that's like, when I think of dry drunk, you know, obviously not a medical term, but I think of like, it's referring to somebody who acts the way they do, like has the same behaviors, the same dysfunctional behaviors, maladaptive behaviors when they're not drinking as when they are, meaning that they, you know, they sort of learn a way of behaving that really is not good for them and messes up their relationships, and it can stay with them long after they stop. There definitely can be that, and I'm not saying there always is, but there definitely, in my opinion, can be that when people quit gaming. I mean, for one thing, there's something called reward deficiency syndrome, which is like a kind of withdrawal that can last a while, several days, in fact, where you, you know, let's say you binge gamed for 2 days straight, you sort of desensitize yourself to stimulation. And so when you then cut the games off, you become very irritable and very bored because nothing stimulates you after that. And nothing can really quite have the effect on you that the games did. So, you know, that can be a state of days of just acting like really irritated and bored all the time. And so that's one phenomenon. And then there's, you know, the types of behaviors you learn as sort of like a survival skill when you have any addiction, like stealing, lying, you know, doing whatever you can to get your next fix. We call them seeking behaviors, you know, the slang term for
stimulus seeking. Right.
Yeah,
stimulus
seeking, or right, the sort of, you know, slang term is fiending. You know, somebody's fiending all the time means they're just stimulus seeking all the time, and they'll say whatever, do whatever to get their, you know, no matter what it is, to get their next fix. And, you know, it's possible that some of those behaviors can stay even if they're not using whatever their drug of choice is, including gaming. But I like to think that in a lot of cases, with time, those behaviors do go away.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly parents have told me they have. So,
and this will be our last question here from D. Carlene. What have you found helps break their resistance to treatment, especially when they're forced by their families? So is there anything you found that kind of helps warm people up to the treatment experience?
Yeah. I mean, we all have our different approaches, but I'll start with mine, and Cliff, then you can jump in. Like, so my office is all things homage to gaming. I have like replicas of like of guns on the wall, like mounted like a hunting lodge. I have figurines everywhere. They learn really quickly that I love games, that I'm interested in games. I often know more about them than they do. And so when they come in, they realize I'm weird. Like I'm not like the 3 other psychologists they met with first. And so I get them. And that usually is all it takes. Someone who actually wants to cherish the experiences they're having. And like, yeah, that's really cool. I understand why you like that. And compare it to other games and talk about that stuff. Yeah. And then when you're in that place where they really care about you and your opinion, and they see you as like the cool uncle that like plays games also, but also has a really productive life, then they're willing to hear criticism. So I will be able to say the things that parents have been saying all along, but they'll be heard in a different light because I don't have a dog in the fight. And so we get to a place where like, all right, but there are some ways that this is not working for you. Let's talk about what those might be. And usually there are, by the time they come to see a psychologist, they've like failed classes, they've like really struggled in certain ways. And then they will often shift. Now they don't always shift. So in my practice, I have a sort of a mode of doing treatment where there's a lot of transparency with me and the parents. So after every session, I get permission from the kids or the patient to talk with the parents about here's what we talked about, here's what's going on, here's what he said, here's what I said, here's what we're working on. And so very quickly we realize whether or not the person is sort of like playing along or that they're really participating in treatment. So while I can't promise that every person is going to be successful, what happens is we learn really quickly if it's not being effective because, we have like such transparency that everyone kind of knows what's happening or not happening. And so that I find that structure works better than traditional therapy where like what's said in the room is kind of stays in the room. And I have to get buy-in from everyone that they're willing to do that. But what that enables is like, we learn really quickly, like, are these conversations useful or not? And so if it's not working, we know it right away. And so it's a little different from resistance, but it's also a way of figuring out whether or not you're wasting people's time or not, which is a huge problem. Cliff, what do you do?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of that. That's really helpful, Ed. And I probably do focus a little more on boundaries between what I do with the kids and the parents, and making sure that kids feel like I do emphasize neutrality. I mean, I guess I did a lot of more traditional types of psychotherapy before doing this. And so, I do emphasize, being non-judgmental. I did a lot of studying of motivational interviewing techniques, which are really designed for working with addicts in a way that's totally very awesome. Non-judgmental and neutral, and sort of, again, meeting them where they are. You're trying to have them tell you what they want to change rather than you being another authority figure or a parental extension telling them what they need to do. And that really does work. I mean, it's designed for resistance. It really cuts through resistance. Also, I just feel like not condescending to kids cuts through resistance, letting them, like, actually trying to educate them in a way that respects them and respects their ability to learn and their thirst for knowledge, and like teaching them things about their brain using visual and animation things to teach them, because, they really are fascinated by how their own brains work. And, so that'll sometimes break resistance. But I find the key is that I have to have the kid telling me why they need to change. If I'm just another adult telling them what they need to change, and they also to tell me what needs to change. If I'm just another adult saying it, it's just kids are more likely to do what you do than what you say anyway. They'll often do the opposite, especially teenagers. And then a lot of the work I'll do with parents is explaining those concepts to them, but also emphasizing to the parents that, look, you need to set the limits. I'll help you, give you some guidelines for it, but you can't expect me to come in and be the screen police for you. You know, that's really a job that parents have to learn how to do, and I'll train you to do it. But when I'm with your kid, if you make me the screen police, they're not going to tell me anything, you know,
The
and they're
expression
not
that I
going to
use is
at all.
yeah. The expression I use is you don't want to be you don't want me to be the third parent. We've
Yeah.
already had two parents, and that's you know, that's where we are right now. But you don't want a third parent.
Yeah, and parents in the same way can't be a therapist.
Right.
You know, they sometimes do have to take a more sort of you know, approach where they're more assertive and about setting limits, and they actually do make judgments about certain behaviors and point out consequences. But you know, it's parents need to have a balanced approach. You know, that's also something I emphasize with them a lot, is, you know, trying to find the right balance, especially, you know, an age appropriate balance between you know, setting limits and using parental authority, and also encouraging kids to be independent and to self-regulate.
Well, Cliff, you and I have talked a lot about this too, that like as a psychologist or as a psychiatrist, like as a parent consultant, you have to evaluate like where the parents are and their skill sets
Absolutely.
and their values, and then
Yeah.
customize the treatment to like what's going to work for them. You don't want
Right.
to ask. You don't want to ask someone, like the world is full of advice given to the wrong good advice given to the wrong person.
That's right.
Like, you don't want to ask someone to do something they just can't do, or that's like
Yeah.
not in their, it's like too far from who they are. And they'll
Yeah.
often be in their desperation willing to say that they're willing to, but then they won't.
Mhm.
So you really have to make a judgment call about like, is this person, you know, what's the right choice for these parents given
Yeah.
their like situation? Are they in triage? Or are they like, do they have emotional resources to really do things differently? How comfortable are they with change? And then make recommendations that are going to be, you know, different and make change in their lives and their families' lives, but not so much that it's like not going to be doable.
Yeah, and you also have to realize when they are just really in over their heads and they do need outside, like, additional help, like they need to be in a residential setting,
Right.
or with a day program, like, you know. So we also have to recognize when, you know, there's just a situation that is just too volatile and not going in the right direction, and you know, so we'll deal with that too. We have to make that assessment.
Yeah, the full reboots are often the hardest, where you have to pull someone out of the house for a while.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both very, very much. This has been fantastic. I hope that viewers are seeing we could go much deeper and much broader. So if you want to learn more, please do. A few places you can do that. If you check out the ECPG YouTube channel, both of these gentlemen have educational video blogs there on these subjects that you can watch, as well as some others from some of the other presenters on this subject that we work with. The Foundations in Gaming Disorder training is coming up this fall. Check out our website for that, and you'll hear more from them about different treatment approaches, as well as hearing from Hillary Cash about residential treatment, as well as a VR demo, as well as some prevention strategies. It's pretty in depth. So definitely encourage everybody to take that.
Yeah,
and
I've got
link to the blog has all these resources for you.
Sure. Ed and I both have websites with a lot of like educational resources you can get to. And I've got a 3 CE credit course for professionals who want to learn more about assessing and treating internet and video game addiction. There's a link on my website, or you can just go right to digitalusedisorders.com. So
also, just in any given week, I get approached by some professionals like, I'm seeing this client, I'm in this situation, you know, do you want to take this client, or is there something I can do differently? And so we also consult with professionals. I don't know if, Cliff, how much you do this, but we're just sort of giving guidance a little about like, how should you approach this?
A lot.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. And for those who are watching later, I hope you enjoyed it, and take care. Check out the blog for all the resources.